Beyond the portraits, proclamations, and carefully preserved traditions of Britain's royal past lies a collection of stories that rarely make their way into official histories. These are moments that didn't fit the polished narrative, events so unusual, so unexpected, that they were often softened, sidelined, or quietly forgotten over time. For centuries, the monarchy has been associated with ceremony, continuity, and control. Yet even within that tightly managed world, strange and improbable things happened. Tonight, we're exploring 15 bizarre stories from British royal history that are not myths, legends, or later embellishments, but accounts drawn from contemporary records, correspondence, and historical documentation. These aren't tales designed to shock or provoke. They're moments that reveal how unpredictable life could be behind palace walls. Incidents that puzzled courtiers, confused historians, and reminded those closest to power that even royalty was not immune to oddity, coincidence, or human unpredictability. From unexpected behaviours to unusual decisions and events that defied explanation at the time, each story offers a glimpse into the less orderly side of royal life, the side that rarely appears in textbooks, but quietly survives in archives and first-hand accounts. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Perhaps lower the lights, settle into your favourite position, and allow the pace of the story to slow your thoughts. And if you feel like it, let us know where you're listening from tonight. Are you winding down somewhere in the UK? Listening late at night across the Atlantic? Or easing into sleep somewhere else entirely? Leave a comment and tell us what time it is where you are. This is a calm journey through history's stranger moments. Not rumours, not speculation, but documented stories that remind us how unpredictable even the most structured lives can be. Because behind every crown and title was a human being, living through events that were sometimes far stranger than anyone ever expected. Number 15. King Henry VIII. When excess became routine. King Henry VIII is often remembered through dramatic turning points, marriages, religious change, and political upheaval. But behind those well-known events lay a daily life defined by excess so normalised that it reshaped the culture of the English court itself. From an early age, Henry was raised to believe that grandeur was not merely symbolic, but essential. As king, he embraced this philosophy fully. Court life under Henry became a near constant display of abundance, where restraint was neither expected nor admired. Meals were vast, frequent, and elaborate, sometimes lasting for hours, and involving dozens of courses designed less for nourishment than for spectacle. Contemporary accounts describe a court where indulgence was routine rather than exceptional. Feasts followed hunts. Entertainment followed feasts. Music, pageantry, and physical display filled the hours between official duties. Henry himself set the tone. His appetite for luxury extended beyond food into clothing, architecture, and ceremony. Jewel-encrusted garments, richly decorated halls, and carefully choreographed displays of power became daily features of royal life. What makes Henry's behaviour particularly bizarre by historical standards is how thoroughly excess was woven into routine. This was not occasional celebration. It was the rhythm of governance. The king's schedule revolved around comfort and display, with courtiers expected to adapt themselves accordingly. To keep pace was to remain in favour. To object was to risk exclusion. As Henry aged, his physical condition deteriorated, yet the lifestyle continued unchanged. Chronic pain and limited mobility did little to alter his habits. Medical advice was often recorded, but rarely followed. Instead, adjustments were made around the king rather than by him. Chairs were modified, rooms were rearranged. The structure of the court bent itself to accommodate excess rather than reduce it. Observers at the time did not always describe this behaviour as shocking, which is precisely what makes it so strange. In a world where monarchy was meant to embody discipline and divine order, Henry's refusal to moderate himself became accepted as a fact of life. Excess was reframed as authority. Indulgence became indistinguishable from power. The psychological effect on the court was profound. Courtiers learned that approval came not through wisdom or restraint, but through participation. Displays grew larger. Expectations escalated. The boundary between personal desire and public duty blurred until it nearly vanished. Henry's reign left behind more than political change. It left a cultural imprint in which abundance was equated with legitimacy. Later, monarchs would struggle to separate authority from spectacle, a legacy that traced directly back to the habits established during Henry's rule. What makes this story unsettling is not any single act, but the normalization of excess itself. A king whose daily life revolved around indulgence did not see himself as indulgent. To Henry VIII, this was simply how power was meant to look and feel. As we move deeper into this series, the stories will grow stranger, more intimate, and more difficult to explain. But Henry VIII stands as an important beginning, a reminder that sometimes the most bizarre royal behavior is not hidden in secret moments, but embedded quietly into everyday life. Number 14. Queen Caroline of Brunswick. When a royal trial became public theatre, Queen Caroline of Brunswick occupies one of the strangest chapters in British royal history, not because of a single scandal, but because her personal conflict with the monarchy unfolded as a spectacle witnessed by an entire nation. Caroline married George, Prince of Wales, in 1795. From the beginning, the relationship was deeply strained. The two were incompatible in temperament, expectation, and personal habits, and their marriage quickly deteriorated into separation. What followed was not quiet distance, but years of tension that slowly moved from private grievance into public confrontation. When George eventually ascended the throne as King George IV, the unresolved conflict resurfaced with renewed intensity. Caroline, now queen by title, returned to Britain after years abroad, expecting recognition of her status. Instead, she found herself at the centre of an unprecedented political and social drama. Rather than handling the matter discreetly, the government introduced a bill in Parliament designed to strip Caroline of her title and dissolve the marriage. What made this moment bizarre was not only the proposal itself, but the manner in which it was carried out. Proceedings were conducted publicly, debated openly, and reported extensively in newspapers. Ordinary citizens followed the case as if it were a form of entertainment. Crowds gathered outside Parliament, pamphlets circulated, songs and caricatures appeared in public spaces. The private life of a queen became a national obsession. For many observers, the situation felt surreal. A royal marriage dispute transformed into a public trial conducted before the entire country. Caroline herself became an unlikely symbol. To some, she represented resistance to royal authority. To others, she was simply a figure caught in a power struggle far beyond her control. Regardless of interpretation, her presence dominated public conversation in a way no royal consort had before. The proceedings dragged on for months, filled with testimony, counterclaims, and political maneuvering. Yet despite the intensity, no definitive resolution was reached. The bill was eventually withdrawn, not because the matter was settled, but because public sentiment had turned so strongly that continuing became politically risky. What makes this story particularly bizarre is how completely the traditional boundaries of monarchy collapsed. Royal disputes were meant to be handled behind closed doors, shielded by protocol and discretion. In Caroline's case, those protections evaporated. The crown itself appeared vulnerable, exposed to scrutiny and ridicule. For Caroline, the outcome was bittersweet. Though she retained her title in name, she remained estranged from the court and excluded from official ceremonies. Her final years were marked by isolation rather than reconciliation. Historically, the trial left a lasting impression. It demonstrated that royal authority could be challenged not through revolution, but through public opinion. The monarchy survived, but its aura of untouchable privacy did not fully recover. Queen Caroline's story is not remembered for dramatic verdicts or sudden downfall. Instead, it lingers as a quiet absurdity, a moment when the personal life of royalty became public theatre, and the crown found itself unable to restore order through tradition alone. As we continue, the stories ahead will grow more intimate and more unsettling, revealing how easily the structures of power can fracture under human conflict. Number 13, King William IV, the Sailor King, who shocked his own court. King William IV earned an unusual nickname during his lifetime, the Sailor King. Unlike many of his predecessors, William did not grow up immersed solely in palace life. He spent years serving in the Royal Navy, a background that shaped his manner, habits, and expectations in ways that would later unsettle Britain's rigid royal court. When William ascended the throne in 1830, courtiers quickly realized that this was not a monarch inclined toward excessive ceremony. Accustomed to the straightforward routines of naval life, William preferred plain speech, informal conduct, and a relaxed approach to hierarchy. What he viewed as honesty and efficiency, others perceived as startlingly improper. Accounts from the period describe a court struggling to adapt to a king who ignored many of the unspoken rules of royal behavior. William often addressed guests with blunt familiarity, disregarding titles or protocol. Formal events were shortened or simplified. Ceremonial traditions that had been carefully preserved for generations were treated as inconveniences rather than sacred duties. To seasoned courtiers, this behavior felt deeply unsettling. Royal conduct was meant to reinforce distance, dignity, and control. William's informality blurred those boundaries. Servants and officials were reportedly unsure how to behave around a monarch who rejected the very rituals that defined royal authority. One of the most bizarre aspects of William's reign was how openly he resisted grandeur. He disliked elaborate clothing, preferred modest surroundings, and often expressed frustration with the expense of royal life. While previous monarchs used spectacle to command respect, William seemed almost embarrassed by it. Public appearances added to the confusion. William's unscripted remarks sometimes surprised audiences expecting polished speeches. His tone was conversational, occasionally awkward, and devoid of the theatrical flourishes that traditionally reinforced royal mystique. For a society accustomed to carefully curated monarchy, this transparency felt almost disruptive. Yet William did not intend to provoke scandal. His behavior reflected habit rather than rebellion. Years at sea had instilled a preference for practicality over pageantry. Unfortunately for the court, practicality was not what monarchy had been designed to project. The contrast between expectation and reality became a quiet source of tension. Some observers welcomed the change, interpreting William's behavior as refreshing honesty. Others worried that informality weakened the symbolic power of the crown, making it appear ordinary rather than elevated. What makes William IV's story particularly bizarre is how mild his behavior seems by modern standards, yet how profoundly it unsettled his contemporaries. Simply refusing excessive ceremony was enough to shock a system built on ritualized distance. In many ways, William's reign exposed the fragility of royal image. When tradition is removed, even slightly, the illusion of permanence begins to flicker. The court adapted, but uneasily, unsure whether the monarchy could survive without its layers of formality intact. As we move forward, the stories ahead will delve deeper into behavior that went beyond informality into territory far more troubling. William IV stands as a reminder that sometimes the most disruptive royal behavior is not cruelty or scandal, but the refusal to perform the role as expected. Number 12. Queen Victoria, the monarch who secretly loved the occult. Queen Victoria is often remembered as the embodiment of restraint, morality, and imperial stability. her name became synonymous with an entire era defined by order and propriety. Yet beneath this carefully cultivated image was a private fascination that would have unsettled many of her subjects had it been widely known at the time. Following the death of her husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, Victoria entered a prolonged period of grief that deeply altered her inner life. While publicly she withdrew into mourning, privately she began exploring spiritual practices that promise connection beyond the physical world. What began as consolation gradually evolved into an intense curiosity about the unseen. Victoria became particularly interested in seances and spiritualist practices, which were gaining popularity across Europe in the mid-19th century. Spiritualism claimed to offer communication with the dead through mediums, table rapping, automatic writing, and other rituals. Though many dismissed these practices as parlor tricks, others believed they offered genuine insight into the afterlife. The Queen's private journals and correspondence reveal that she attended seances and maintained relationships with spiritual advisors. She was especially drawn to individuals who claimed the ability to channel spirits or receive messages from beyond. These encounters were not treated lightly. Victoria approached them with earnest hope rather than entertainment. What makes this story bizarre is not merely that Victoria explored spiritualism, but that she did so while presiding over an empire grounded in rational governance and scientific progress. At a time when Britain prided itself on industrial advancement, its monarch quietly entertained beliefs that existed far outside official doctrine. Even more unusual was Victoria's reliance on trusted intermediaries to guide these experiences. She was cautious about public exposure, aware that such interests could undermine her authority if discovered. The monarchy depended on an image of control and certainty, qualities incompatible with unseen forces and whispered messages from the beyond. Court officials reportedly viewed spiritualism with skepticism, but few dared challenge the Queen directly. Her grief granted her privacy, and her authority discouraged interference. As a result, these practices remained largely hidden from the public until later historical examination revealed their extent. To modern observers, Victoria's interest may seem understandable, a grieving widow searching for comfort. But within the context of her time, it represented a quiet contradiction at the heart of the British monarchy. The figurehead of order was privately drawn to uncertainty. This tension between public identity and private belief makes Victoria's story particularly strange. While statues portrayed permanence and strength, the woman behind them sought reassurance from forces that could not be measured or proven. As we continue through these stories, the divide between appearance and reality will grow increasingly pronounced. Queen Victoria reminds us that even the most rigidly defined rulers carried inner worlds that defied expectation, worlds hidden carefully behind closed doors, where belief quietly challenged authority. Number 11. King Richard II. The royal who spoke to objects. King Richard II of England, who reigned from 1377 to 1399, is remembered for many things: a turbulent reign, his eventual overthrow, and a personality that courtiers often found unusual. Among the more bizarre aspects of his behaviour was his habit of speaking to objects, particularly those he considered symbols of royal authority. These weren't idle conversations. Chroniclers of the time noted that Richard often confided in the regalia he wore, the crown, the sceptre, and even ceremonial robes, treating them almost as living companions. This practice may strike modern observers as strange or even humorous, but in context, it reflected a deeply symbolic view of kingship. For Richard, the crown wasn't just a piece of gold. It embodied divine authority, the weight of the nation, and the responsibilities he bore. Speaking to these objects may have been his way of acknowledging the immense burden of ruling and reinforcing his connection to the monarchy's sanctity. Yet this behaviour did not go unnoticed. Courtiers recorded instances of Richard addressing the crown before entering a council meeting, or confiding in the sceptre while deliberating important state matters. These anecdotes often amused the court and were sometimes interpreted as signs of a monarch out of touch with reality. Modern historians suggest that such behaviour, while unusual, likely stemmed from the intense pressures of a young king ascending the throne at just 10 years old, coupled with a belief system that blurred the spiritual and material worlds. Richard's habit extended beyond regalia. He was known to speak to objects in his personal quarters and even to certain architectural features of his palaces. Doors, windows, and decorative tapestries became part of his courtly dialogue, treated as witnesses to his thoughts and moods. It's important to note that while this may sound eccentric, it was never malicious or harmful. It didn't endanger anyone, nor did it involve scandalous acts. It was simply a reflection of his unique approach to kingship and personal expression. Psychologists and historians today view Richard's behaviour as a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a medieval ruler. It shows how power, isolation, and personal belief systems could intertwine to produce behaviours that, to us, appear odd or bizarre. Speaking to objects was one of many ways Richard navigated the immense responsibilities and expectations placed upon him, offering a quiet insight into the private life of a king, often remembered more for political strife than personal quirks. Ultimately, King Richard II's conversations with objects remind us that royal eccentricities are not always about scandal or misrule. Sometimes they reflect the human need for connection, understanding, and ritual in the face of overwhelming responsibility. In Richard's case, the crown and sceptre weren't merely symbols. They were confidants, silent partners in the heavy and often lonely journey of kingship. Number 10. Queen Mary I, the phantom pregnancy that fooled a nation. Queen Mary I of England, often remembered as Bloody Mary due to her persecution of Protestants, experienced one of the most bizarre episodes in royal history, a phantom pregnancy that captured the attention of the entire nation. In 1554, Mary announced to her court and the public that she was expecting her first child with her husband Philip II of Spain. The news sparked joy across England. Subjects hoped for a much-anticipated heir who could secure the Tudor line, and the anticipation gripped the court with excitement and curiosity. However, as months passed, questions began to arise. Mary's supposed pregnancy showed all the signs expected of the era. She gained weight, appeared with a rounded belly, and even experienced symptoms commonly associated with pregnancy. Courtiers, physicians, and astrologers were all enlisted to observe, confirm, and support the Queen's condition. Preparations were made for the eventual birth, including ceremonial arrangements and celebrations. Yet, when the day of delivery approached, there was no child. The episode was perplexing for contemporaries and has puzzled historians ever since. Medical understanding in the 16th century was limited, and no one could definitively explain Mary's condition. Some speculate that it could have been a case of false pregnancy, a phenomenon in which physical symptoms mimic real pregnancy despite the absence of a fetus. Stress, intense desire, and psychological pressure could trigger such symptoms, and for a queen under extreme public and political scrutiny, it's plausible that her mind and body responded in this unusual way. Mary's phantom pregnancy had political implications as well. England was eager for a Tudor heir to solidify succession, and the announcement temporarily stabilised Mary's rule, offering hope to a nation still adjusting to her religious reforms. When the pregnancy was revealed to be false, disappointment and gossip spread, yet Mary maintained her composure, demonstrating the resilience and dignity she would show throughout her reign. This bizarre episode is remembered not as scandalous or defamatory, but as an extraordinary moment of human experience intersecting with monarchy. Mary's condition, whether physiological, psychological, or both, highlights the unique pressures faced by royals whose lives were constantly observed and whose personal health could become matters of national concern. It also serves as a reminder that even the most powerful individuals are subject to the quirks and mysteries of the human body. In retrospect, the phantom pregnancy of Queen Mary I stands out as a historical curiosity that combines personal vulnerability, political expectation, and medical mystery. It's a story that fascinates not for scandal or shame, but for the strange and deeply human ways in which royalty and circumstance can converge, sometimes producing events that puzzle an entire nation. Number 9. King Henry III, the king who built shrines everywhere. King Henry III of England, who reigned from 1216 to 1272, is remembered as one of the more devout and ceremonious monarchs in British history. Among the many unusual aspects of his reign was an almost obsessive dedication to building shrines, chapels, and religious monuments throughout his kingdom. For Henry, faith was not only a personal matter, it was an outward expression of kingship, power, and divine legitimacy. Yet by modern standards, his excessive devotion created a strange pattern. Wherever he went, new religious structures seemed to appear, leaving courtiers and subjects alike in awe, confusion, or sometimes exasperation. Henry's fascination with shrines was partly inspired by his deep admiration for saints and relics. He believed that surrounding himself with symbols of holiness could protect both him and his realm. As a result, he commissioned countless chapels, tombs, and altars, sometimes in rapid succession, and often insisting on elaborate architectural details that required immense resources and labour. Chronicles of the time describe him personally inspecting every aspect of these projects, from the layout of stonework to the placement of statues. This pattern of relentless building was unusual not only in scale but also in intent. Henry did not merely build for utility or prestige, he built for devotion. One of the most famous examples is his work on Westminster Abbey, which he expanded and adorned with chapels dedicated to saints. Throughout England, it was said that no town or cathedral escaped his attention, creating a kind of religious landscape uniquely stamped with the king's personal piety. To his contemporaries, Henry's shrine building could be bewildering. Resources were strained, local populations were sometimes inconvenienced, and the sheer number of structures raised eyebrows. Yet there was no scandal or malfeasance in his actions. His motives were sincere, reflecting a spiritual and aesthetic vision rather than political manipulation. Modern historians interpret this as an early example of a ruler expressing personal identity through architectural devotion, a habit that seems bizarre only when viewed outside the medieval mindset. Beyond architecture, Henry's obsession reveals something about the pressures and responsibilities of kingship. In an era when divine favour was considered essential to maintaining authority, surrounding oneself with shrines could serve as both spiritual reassurance and public signalling. By literally shaping the physical and religious landscape of his kingdom, Henry III ensured that his reign would be remembered not only for political events, but also for a uniquely visible imprint of faith. In the end, King Henry III's penchant for building shrines everywhere is a story that blends eccentricity with devotion, leaving a legacy that is visually striking and historically fascinating. It reminds us that sometimes what seems bizarre or excessive can also be a deeply human expression of belief, identity, and ambition. Number 8. Prince Albert, the royal who redesigned daily life. Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, husband to Queen Victoria, is often remembered for his intellect, cultural influence, and progressive ideas. Yet one of the most bizarre aspects of his life was his obsessive attention to the minutiae of daily existence, both in his personal household and across the royal court. From table settings to domestic routines, Albert meticulously redesigned nearly every aspect of royal life, turning ordinary tasks into highly structured systems that sometimes left courtiers bewildered. Albert's approach was rooted in his vision of order, efficiency, and modernity. He believed that a properly organized household reflected both the dignity of the monarchy and the stability of the nation. This translated into strict schedules for meals, work, and ceremonial duties. Furniture, silverware, and even the placement of flowers were subject to his careful supervision. Diaries from the era recount staff anxiously adjusting candlesticks or repositioning chairs to meet his exacting standards, sometimes multiple times a day. His influence extended beyond the palace. Albert introduced systematic reforms in administration, education, and public ceremonies, all designed to project a sense of decorum and progress. He reorganized the royal archives, standardized correspondence, and meticulously planned public events to ensure flawless execution. While these actions were ultimately beneficial, they also earned him a reputation for rigidity and, at times, obsessive control. The bizarre element in Albert's life emerges when considering the sheer intensity of his involvement. Unlike other royals who might delegate daily operations, Albert took personal responsibility for details most would consider trivial. Courtiers described him inspecting the alignment of table settings or personally correcting staff errors in decorating rooms. To outsiders, this level of micromanagement seemed excessive, bordering on eccentric. But to Albert, it was a reflection of his commitment to excellence and the dignity of his station. Importantly, this obsession was not scandalous or harmful. It did not involve public controversy or personal misconduct. Instead, it provides a fascinating look at the ways in which a royal's personality and values can shape the routines of an entire court. Albert's reforms modernized life in the palace and set standards that influenced British ceremonial practice for generations. Prince Albert's story reminds us that royal eccentricity is not always about wild indulgence or scandal. Sometimes it is expressed through an extraordinary dedication to order, structure, and improvement. In his case, the bizarre aspect lies in the intensity with which he transformed everyday life, leaving behind a legacy of precision and a royal court run with a level of meticulous care rarely seen in history. Number 7. King Edward VI, the boy king obsessed with death records. King Edward VI of England, who ascended the throne at the tender age of 9, is often remembered as the young monarch who carried the weight of a kingdom while still a child. Yet one of the most peculiar aspects of his reign was his fascination with death records, executions, and the minutiae of mortality, a fixation that strikes modern readers as both morbid and bizarre. Edward's interest began early. Surrounded by adults managing the intricacies of governance, the boy king developed a habit of recording and scrutinizing details of illnesses, deaths, and executions. Chronicles suggest that he would maintain detailed notes of who died, under what circumstances, and even how they passed. Physicians and courtiers observed that Edward displayed a remarkable memory for dates, names, and events, often cross-referencing cases and comparing them with his own records. This obsession with mortality was partly a product of the era. The 16th century was rife with disease, political intrigue, and sudden death, making an understanding of mortality practically relevant for a ruler. Yet for Edward, the interest went beyond practicality. Historians note that he seemed genuinely curious about human fragility, the finality of life, and the rituals surrounding death. For a child king growing up amidst power struggles and the constant threat of rebellion, death was an omnipresent reality, and his fascination was a way to engage with and perhaps make sense of it. While it might seem unsettling to imagine a young king tracking executions as if they were a school project, Edward's behaviour did not involve cruelty or malice. He did not order unnecessary deaths or indulge in violence for amusement. His engagement with death was intellectual and observational. His records provided insight into the administration of justice and public health, reflecting both the harsh realities of Tudor England and the precocious mind of a boy thrust into immense responsibility. Edward VI's unusual obsession also illustrates how childhood, education, and royal life intersected in the Tudor era. Unlike modern children, who might explore curiosity through play, Edward explored his through meticulous note-taking and observation of adult matters, particularly those connected to life and death. It was a coping mechanism, a learning tool, and a reflection of his unique position as both a vulnerable child and a sovereign with ultimate authority. In the end, the story of Edward VI and his fascination with death records is a reminder that royal eccentricities are often shaped by circumstance, responsibility, and intellect. What seems morbid or bizarre to us today was, for the boy king, a method of understanding the world around him and preparing himself for the weighty duties of kingship. It's a striking example of how history can present human behavior that is both unusual and profoundly understandable when viewed in context. Number 6. Queen Anne, the monarch who lost 17 children. Queen Anne of England, who reigned from 1702 to 1714, is often remembered as a monarch who presided over the unification of England and Scotland. Yet behind the grandeur of her reign lies a deeply personal and tragic story. Anne lost 17 children, with none surviving to adulthood. This repeated heartbreak profoundly shaped her life, behaviour, and even the course of her monarchy, creating a history that is both sorrowful and strangely compelling. Anne's childbearing years were marked by immense hope and repeated grief. Her pregnancies were frequent, often ending in miscarriage, stillbirth, or the early death of an infant. Contemporary accounts describe Anne's alternating periods of hope, despair, and stoic composure as she navigated the cycle of expectation and loss. The emotional toll of losing so many children cannot be overstated. It left a mark on her personality, relationships, and her approach to both family and courtly life. This tragic pattern also had political implications. In an era when royal succession was crucial to national stability, Anne's inability to produce a surviving heir created anxiety at court and concern among her subjects. Advisors, politicians, and foreign powers closely monitored her pregnancies, with every announcement carrying both personal and national significance. The repeated losses made the issue of succession a constant source of tension, demonstrating how deeply private misfortune could intersect with public responsibility. Yet despite these challenges, Anne remained a capable and determined monarch. She navigated the demands of governance while enduring profound personal sorrow, a duality that contributed to her historical image as both resilient and deeply human. Historians note that her experiences with loss may have influenced her empathy and her attention to matters of welfare and politics, suggesting that even tragedy can shape leadership in meaningful ways. Anne's story is considered bizarre, not because of scandal or eccentricity, but because of the extraordinary scale of her personal misfortune. Few monarchs have endured such repeated loss while maintaining the duties of the throne, and this combination of private grief and public expectation creates a narrative that is both poignant and historically significant. Ultimately, Queen Anne's life reminds us that royal history is not only about power and ceremony, it is also about the deeply human experiences that shape leaders behind the scenes. Her repeated losses, though tragic, highlight the emotional realities of monarchy in a period when personal and political lives were inseparably intertwined. In Anne's story, we see a queen defined not only by her achievements, but by her resilience in the face of profound and repeated sorrow. Number 5. King James VI and I, the monarch, terrified of witchcraft. King James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England in 1603, is often remembered for his political skill, his literary patronage, and for commissioning the King James Bible. Yet one of the more bizarre aspects of his reign was his intense fear of witchcraft, a fascination and paranoia that influenced policy, court life, and even his personal writing. James's fear of witches began early. influenced by the turbulent political and religious climate of Scotland. He believed that witches were real agents of evil, capable of threatening kings and kingdoms alike. This concern escalated after the North Berwick witch trials of 1590, during which he personally interrogated accused witches. He came to be convinced that supernatural forces actively plotted against him and that his role as monarch made him a prime target. The king's obsession extended beyond personal belief. He authored a treatise titled Demonology in 1597, in which he explored witchcraft, magic, and demonic influence. The book was part scholarly study, part moral warning, and part practical guide on identifying witches. James's writings reflect a mind captivated by the unseen, combining fear, curiosity, and a desire to protect his realm through knowledge. James's witchcraft paranoia had tangible effects on governance. Laws were passed and trials conducted with the king's approval, leading to convictions and executions of alleged witches. Courtiers and citizens alike had to navigate this climate of suspicion, knowing that even minor misfortune could be interpreted as supernatural attack. Yet the fascination was not merely political, it was intensely personal. James reportedly believed witches could manipulate events to harm him or his family, and he consulted extensively on countermeasures. To modern observers, James's behavior may seem eccentric, even extreme, but it must be understood in historical context. Fear of witchcraft was common in early modern Europe, and for a king responsible for maintaining divine order, vigilance against perceived supernatural threats could appear entirely rational. James's unique contribution was the intensity of his obsession and his willingness to codify it into law and literature, creating a legacy where superstition and monarchy intersected dramatically. Ultimately, King James VI and the First Terror of Witchcraft provides a fascinating glimpse into the mind of a ruler shaped by fear, religion, and political responsibility. It stands out as bizarre not for scandal or cruelty alone, but for the unusual way personal paranoia shaped an entire monarchy. His story reminds us that even the most powerful figures are influenced by fears that may seem strange to future generations, making history both human and unexpectedly peculiar. Number 4. Princess Alexandra of Denmark, the royal trendsetter who walked strangely. Princess Alexandra of Denmark, who became the beloved queen consort of Edward VII, was admired for her elegance, charm, and fashion sense. Yet behind her poised exterior was a curious and rather bizarre trait. She walked with a noticeable limp, a personal peculiarity that unintentionally set a European fashion trend. The limp reportedly stemmed from an injury in her youth, though details about its severity are scarce. What made it truly unusual, however, was how this minor physical difference captured the attention of the public and the aristocracy alike. Courtiers and citizens observed her gait closely, and soon the princess's distinctive walk became a subject of fascination and imitation. Fashion magazines of the era commented on her style, not only in dress but in movement, praising the grace with which she carried herself despite her limp. This eccentricity spread far beyond mere curiosity. Upper-class women across Europe began emulating aspects of Alexandra's walk, consciously or unconsciously, believing it to reflect refinement and nobility. It is said that the limp became a subtle status symbol, a mark of sophistication linked to the royal family. The bizarre combination of a physical limitation turning into a cultural trend highlights how royal behavior, even when unintentional, can shape society in unexpected ways. Alexandra's limp also influenced the way she was perceived as a leader and public figure. Rather than detracting from her presence, it humanized her, making her approachable while simultaneously adding an element of distinction. Portraits and illustrations often captured her unique posture, and she maintained the grace expected of royalty, proving that perceived imperfections can become defining qualities. Historically, this anecdote provides insight into the interplay between physical traits, public perception, and cultural influence. Alexandra's limp was not scandalous or harmful. It was simply a personal characteristic amplified by public fascination. In an era when royal image was meticulously curated, the unintentional trend she inspired shows how even small, unusual traits can ripple across society, leaving lasting impressions. Princess Alexandra's story reminds us that royal eccentricities are not always about excess, indulgence, or misbehavior. Sometimes they are subtle quirks that capture the imagination of a nation. In her case, a simple limp became a signature of elegance, demonstrating the strange ways in which individuality and public life can intersect, turning a minor physical oddity into an enduring cultural phenomenon. Number 3. King Charles II, the royal who turned science into court entertainment. King Charles II of England, who reigned from 1660 to 1685, is remembered as the merry monarch for his lively personality, charm, and love of courtly amusements. Yet one of the most bizarre aspects of his reign was his fascination with science and experiments, so much so that he turned scientific inquiry into a form of court entertainment. Charles had an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. He regularly invited scientists, alchemists, and inventors to present their discoveries at court, often staging demonstrations that ranged from the enlightening to the downright peculiar. Public dissections, anatomical studies, and chemical experiments were conducted in his presence, with courtiers observing the proceedings with a mix of awe and bewilderment. These were not mere private hobbies. Charles actively encouraged experimentation, making the royal court a centre for scientific exploration during a period when superstition still dominated much of Europe. The king's enthusiasm extended to personal participation. He was known to ask detailed questions, handle specimens, and even conduct small experiments himself. Accounts from the time describe him observing electrical phenomena, studying exotic animals, and experimenting with early microscopes. While modern audiences might view this as eccentric, it demonstrates a ruler who blended curiosity, showmanship, and education in a way that was highly unusual for a monarch. Charles's approach had broader implications for society. By publicly supporting science, he helped elevate its status in England, encouraging others to pursue inquiry and observation. Yet the theatrical aspect of these demonstrations, turning experiments into spectacles, adds a layer of strangeness. Courtiers sometimes found themselves witnesses to events that were both intellectually stimulating and bizarre, such as dissecting animals before an audience, or observing chemical reactions that emitted unusual fumes and colours. Importantly, none of these actions were harmful or scandalous. They were rooted in genuine fascination and a desire to blend learning with entertainment. Charles's eccentricity lay in his willingness to break from the traditional, decorous expectations of monarchy and immerse himself fully in activities that many would have considered unsuitable for a king. King Charles II's story reminds us that royal eccentricity can take many forms. In his case, it manifested as a playful yet serious engagement with science, a passion that was both educational and bizarre to his contemporaries. By transforming his court into a hub of experimentation and curiosity, Charles left a legacy of intellectual curiosity intertwined with regal spectacle, demonstrating that sometimes the most unusual behaviors arise from a simple, insatiable desire to understand the world. Number 2. Queen Victoria, the monarch obsessed with morning rituals. Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom, who reigned from 1837 to 1901, is remembered as one of Britain's most iconic monarchs. Yet behind her public persona of dignity and stability lay a deeply personal and bizarre obsession: her adherence to strict mourning rituals following the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert. This devotion shaped not only her daily life, but also the atmosphere of the royal court and, to a surprising extent, public perception. When Prince Albert died in 1861, Victoria was devastated. She withdrew from public life, wearing black for the remainder of her reign and establishing a rigid set of mourning practices. Her grief extended beyond attire. She avoided social events, maintained darkened rooms, and limited her appearances in public. Court life revolved around her sorrow, with courtiers and staff required to adhere to her strict standards of mourning decorum. The Queen's obsession was so intense that some described the royal household as almost frozen in time, reflecting a state of perpetual mourning. Victoria's rituals included carefully prescribed clothing, jewellery, and even furniture arrangements. Mourning jewellery, often featuring the hair of her late husband, became a personal statement, while the black clothing she wore symbolised both her loss and her loyalty. Courtiers and visitors quickly learned that breaking even minor protocols could provoke displeasure, making the Queen's grief both a deeply personal matter and a public expectation. While this level of ritual may appear extreme to modern observers, it was rooted in deeply human emotions. Victoria's behaviour illustrates how grief can shape personality, daily routines, and even cultural norms. Her influence extended beyond the palace. Her example inspired widespread mourning practices across Britain, affecting fashion, social etiquette, and attitudes toward bereavement. In a bizarre twist, her intense personal sorrow became a national template for how to grieve. Importantly, this obsession was not scandalous or harmful. It did not involve cruelty, illegal acts, or public controversy. It was an expression of devotion and emotional intensity. Historians view Victoria's mourning rituals as a window into the intersection of personal loss, royal duty, and cultural influence, showing how the emotions of a single individual could ripple through an entire society. Queen Victoria's story reminds us that royal eccentricities are not always about extravagance or misbehaviour. Sometimes they emerge from profoundly human experiences, grief, love, and loyalty, that are amplified by the visibility of monarchy. In Victoria's case, the bizarre yet dignified devotion to mourning rituals left an enduring mark on history, demonstrating the strange ways personal emotion can shape public life. Number 1. King George III, the king who spoke for hours without stopping. King George III of England, who reigned from 1760 to 1820, is often remembered for losing the American colonies, but one of the most bizarre and shocking aspects of his life was his episodes of uncontrollable, unending speech. During periods of mental turmoil, now widely thought to be caused by a condition called porphyria, George would enter states where he could talk for hours without pause, exhausting everyone around him. Courtiers, advisors, and even family members were reportedly powerless to interrupt him, often sitting silently as the king rambled relentlessly. Accounts from the time describe these episodes as both fascinating and terrifying. George could speak without pause, moving from topic to topic with astonishing speed, sometimes repeating ideas or jumping into streams of consciousness that made little sense to listeners. Servants and attendants had to prepare for these occurrences, often sitting through long sessions where the king's speech could last the better part of a day. Imagine a single person holding the entire room hostage with words alone. His monologues could cover politics, theology, personal grievances, or obscure historical details, leaving no opportunity for interruption. What made these episodes particularly shocking was not just the duration, but the intensity. George's emotions were amplified during these periods. Anger, anxiety, and despair could pour out in waves, punctuating his endless sentences. Some accounts suggest he ranted so forcefully that visitors were physically exhausted, and household staff feared triggering further agitation. The unpredictability added to the tension. No one knew when a normal conversation might turn into an hours-long ordeal. Historians suggest these speaking bouts reflected George's inner struggles and a mind trapped in chaos. They were a symptom of his medical condition, not intentional cruelty or eccentricity for entertainment. Yet to those witnessing it, it must have seemed almost otherworldly. A monarch so powerful, yet so controlled by his own words that an entire court could become captive to his monologue. The episodes could last so long that even medical observers and advisors were unable to calm him, forcing them to wait out the storm of speech like a natural disaster. King George III's story is shocking precisely because it blends power and vulnerability. A king who commanded armies and nations could be rendered almost helpless by his own mind, subjecting those around him to astonishing and exhausting displays of human fragility. It's a bizarre, compelling, and deeply human reminder that even history's most powerful figures were at the mercy of forces beyond their control, sometimes manifesting in hours upon hours of unstoppable speech that left witnesses both terrified and fascinated. We've explored monarchs whose quirks were as extreme as their power, queens who grieved for decades, kings who spoke endlessly, and princes whose obsessions shaped daily life and culture. From Queen Victoria's all-consuming mourning rituals to King George III's astonishing hours-long speeches, from Prince Albert's meticulous household reforms to Princess Alexandra's inadvertent, trend-setting limp, each story shows a side of royalty rarely seen in polished portraits or history books. These were lives marked not by scandal or defiance, but by extraordinary personal oddities that influenced courts, subjects, and sometimes even entire nations. What's remarkable is how these bizarre habits reveal the deeply human side of monarchy, a fear of witchcraft, a phantom pregnancy, or a fixation on death records may seem strange today, yet they demonstrate how vulnerability, curiosity, and obsession intersected with the immense responsibilities of ruling. Whether it was King Charles II transforming scientific experiments into court spectacle, or King Henry III filling the kingdom with shrines, these eccentricities left legacies that were visually, socially, and culturally unforgettable. Royalty often seems distant, a world of ceremony and tradition. Yet these stories remind us that the people behind the crowns were complex, sometimes obsessive, and always fascinatingly human. Their peculiarities were not just quirks. They shaped court life, influenced fashion, and even impacted history in ways both subtle and profound. If this journey through 15 of Britain's most bizarre royals fascinated you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a look at the hidden, unusual, and utterly captivating lives of history's most remarkable figures. A huge thank you for joining us on this royal odyssey. May your curiosity about the past continue to be bold, unrestrained, and unforgettable, just like the kings, queens, and princes we've uncovered today.